stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe. It's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, is my neighbor's aggressive dog registered as a companion animal for quiet strolls on community college campuses? And will Machine Gun Kelly get over his latest legal troubles and return to providing us with the quality music and movies only he can provide? And now, the podcast host who only wishes his shed studio doubled as a time-traveling phone booth, Pete Dominic.
Yes, that's true. Thank you, Pete Co. Welcome to the show. I mean, who doesn't wish that their shed doubled as a time-traveling device of some sort? I mean, that doesn't make me different or special or weird. Stop judging. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stand Up. Thank you very much for being a part of the listening audience and a contributor to the show. Thank you for letting me take the day off. Hope you had a day off. I didn't announce that I was going to take yesterday off. Hopefully that didn't come as too much of a surprise. Got to go to a wedding in Vermont. Still feeling really uneasy traveling and going to places and doing things. So there was like a low hum of anxiety, just being worried about being at my friend's house, and his daughter got a cold, and I was like, oh no, what is happening? And then, but the wedding was beautiful. Vermont is absolutely beautiful. I love it. Those of you who live there are so lucky. I hope to live there with you someday, myself, I think. And in the meantime, invite me up. Thank you, Mark Lawler, long-time listener, subscriber. Shout out to Vermont people. So anyway, back Labor Day. Hope you had a good one. Long weekend, the unofficial end of summer. How is that making you feel? Check in with yourself. I know I'm trying to, because that can be a real turning point for people to kind of trigger them into the darkness. And I'm not letting that happen. We still got a full month of September, and I'm very excited to be here with you and sharing it with you and every single day here on Stand Up. If you aren't a subscriber, please consider subscribing now for as little as $5. The podcast is free, but it ain't cheap. It's independent media, and somebody's got to pay for it, so why not you? You listen, so subscribe. And those of you who are already subscribing and editing your pledges up, thank you very, very much. You guys are amazing. And now it's time to get to what you tuned in for. The show. How about it? Two excellent guests joining me today. Always love talking to both these guys. Jared Yates, Sexton, Jeff Jarvis coming your way. But before that, I've got some news clips for you, then some headlines. The last 24 in the news dump. Let's do it. Well, if the United States of America media ever has a slow news day, seemingly glad that Labor Day of 2021 was that day. I mean, there wasn't anything seemingly horrifically tragic, mass violence, and natural disaster. The ongoing conversation about Afghanistan and COVID and everything else that we've been continuously talking about carried on for sure, but it was a slow news day, I think it's fair to say. That being said, I do have a few clips for you. And as always, a bunch of random headlines. Let me start first with something not too serious, but got a lot of attention over the weekend. This is the head coach of the Notre Dame football team. His name is Brian Kelly. He sparked backlash for joking that his team needed to be executed after he just barely won the game against their opponent, Florida State. Now, if you had the context here, you might want to realize that he was kind of channeling or paying homage to the former Tampa Bay Buccaneers coach, John McKay, who, when asked years ago while he was after a game, what did you think of execution? What did you think of the execution? He said, I'm for it. Well, that's what Brian Kelly apparently was trying to play off. Anyway, here it is.
This game had it all.
Yeah.
What did you think of your team's ability to withstand Florida State's impressive comeback?
I'm in favor of execution. Maybe our entire team needs to be executed after tonight.
Yeah, not good. I mean, definitely not good, but not worth. I mean, it's ridiculous to get outraged by that. In my opinion, maybe you disagree. He doesn't want to kill anybody on this team. He certainly doesn't want to kill all of the people on his team. He channeled that quote poorly. He crowbarred it in. It backfired, but I don't think we need to get too crazy about that. It's a football coach, and I'm just not. If you're getting real upset about that, and I don't know, maybe there are other things, like everything else that I'm going to share with you and talk about, because shit is going crazy right now. A lot of people feeling very fragile, I think, and that's to be understood. If that's you, I hear you. I'm with you and here for you. But let's get to some of those headlines and wrap our head around them. Here is Dr. Anthony Fauci yesterday talking about disinformation and misinformation, the role it's playing in vaccine hesitation and anti-masking and more.
Well, Jim, disinformation and misinformation is really a very serious issue when it comes to a public health issue like COVID-19, in which it is essential to get correct information out, both for people who are infected and who do need proper medication and proper care, to foster things that are unproven right from the beginning has always been a problem. The best way to counter disinformation and misinformation is to try as best as we all can to get the proper and correct information out. But one of the enemies of public health is disinformation, and unfortunately, we do see that in some quarters.
And one of the best things you can do is keep repeating and messaging the most effective mitigation methods, and that's exactly what Fauci does here as he beats the hell out of what sounds like or seems like a dead horse to many of us, but is actually an effective thing. You got to keep saying this stuff.
Well, that's a tough call, Jim, to prioritize a vaccinated versus an unvaccinated person. I don't think we're going to get there. There's talk of that. What we really should be doing, and I hope we are doing it, is to do everything we can to mitigate this number of people who are getting infected and requiring hospitalization and ICU beds. We are perilously close, as you mentioned in the beginning of the segment, of having, in certain areas of the country, getting so close to having full occupancy that you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to make some very tough choices. The thing to do right now is to pull out all the stops on everything we can do to prevent new infections, which will ultimately lead to hospitalization. Vaccination is the number one. And if that means mandates at the local level for vaccinations, we've got to make sure that masking is implemented. And even if there are mask mandates in which they're trying to push back against mask mandates, there should be mask mandates, because we know masks work. For sure, they work.
All right, Dr. Anthony Fauci repeating what we already know over and over as much as he can, as well as I think other experts. And as that information changes, I like to think that the experts change with it. But I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have lost faith in the medical and scientific community because they didn't, quote, get it right the first time. But, of course, that's not how it works. I had a conversation with a guy about that today, and he had lost faith because they got it wrong so many times. And I said that this is how it works when you are following a virus, no matter what the disease is. But some people just don't understand that's how that works, and it deteriorates their faith and respect for experts. And that is a really important, I think, and detrimental issue in our nation, our society, and around the country. Why they trust others, like comedians like Joe Rogan or pundits like Tucker Carlson, I don't know. What have they done to earn your trust, or what can they do to lose it? Maybe that's a question for somebody else. But yesterday was, as I said, Labor Day, and it's, of course, the holiday pays tribute to workers in our country, traditionally observed first Monday in September. Became a federal holiday in 1894, was created, of course, by a vibrant labor movement in the late 19th century. I myself am a big supporter of unions, and I love these memes that go around Labor Day or any other time, like things like 10 reasons to thank a union, weekends, workday breaks, paid vacation, sick leave, Social Security, minimum wage, the 8-hour workday, overtime pay, child labor laws. and obviously so much more. And so I always love those. But here is the governor of Michigan on Labor Day. She, of course, is the governor of a state where there's a lot of labor unions, specifically the UAW, very active. I'm not sure where there are more UAW members than Michigan, maybe Ohio. I'm not sure. But here she is yesterday, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer.
On Labor Day, we celebrate the idea that we are stronger together and honor the sacrifices that countless union members and leaders made over decades on behalf of working families. Unions help build Michigan's middle class, and unfortunately, over the last couple of decades, they've faced constant attacks on their wages, benefits, their freedom to negotiate together. Today, working people have a friend in the governor's office who will fight for them. I will hold the line against any harmful legislation meant to weaken our unions and to hurt our hardworking families. I'll work hard to make sure working people are treated with dignity and respect. And I'll continue collaborating with unions to protect working people's rights. This Labor Day, we recognize that when labor is strong, we all succeed. And we recommit ourselves to always fighting for working people, with and alongside working people.
All right, there you go, Gretchen Whitmer. Here is the Secretary of Labor, the former mayor of Boston, and a guy who I've interviewed several times. I can tell you right now, he smells amazing. Always smells very, very good. Here he is, Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh.
I know that it's a tough time right now. I mean, your previous story on the Delta variant, a month ago we weren't dealing with such high numbers. A month ago it seemed like our economy was moving in the right direction. We still are going in the right direction, but we just need to continue to stay vigilant and get people vaccinated and get people safe moving forward. The one thing that we were able to do, myself and Secretary Yellen, was we sent letters to the states, all states, to let them know if they want to extend the benefit themselves, they can do that by using the American Rescue Plan money. Not all states, the unemployment numbers are high. Some states, the unemployment numbers are very low.
And here's a little bit more from Marty Walsh on CNN talking about what the Department of Labor is doing to get people back to work and support them if they can't find work.
I think there is also some consideration going on here by people. Are they going to go back to the same job that they had pre-pandemic? And at the Department of Labor, we've gotten out hundreds of millions of dollars out into communities all across America for job training and workforce development. We also using the American Job Centers to connect people to jobs. So I think that and we're living in a pandemic. I think there's a lot of factors here. I think that $300 didn't have as much of an impact as everyone said it did and keep people out of work. We'll see now as we move forward. But those states that ended enhanced benefits did not see any gains at all of people going back to work.
Well, I hope you had a good Labor Day. I hope you unplugged. I hope you enjoyed your family and friends or did nothing, did whatever you want. That's what I hope for you on your Labor Day. And now it's time to move on to an infuriating clip coming from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who's been wrong about war and foreign policy and conflict forever. Like nobody has a worse record of predicting things would happen than he did. But that didn't stop him from doing what he always does. Here he is talking to a European reporter who couldn't believe his ears when Lindsey Graham said, we're going to go back into Afghanistan. We love it there.
It's going to make us all sick to our stomach. But most importantly, they're going to give safe haven to al-Qaeda.
Unbelievably stupid. Almost all the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. The plot was planned in Hamburg, Germany. Al-Qaeda didn't then and doesn't now need a safe haven. They need an internet connection, and that's it. Ridiculous. It's just such a ridiculous thing to say, and he's been saying it forever.
Who has ambitions to drive us out of the Mideast writ large and attack us because of our way of life.
They did not attack us for our way of life. That's not why they attacked us. They told us why they attacked us. Bin Laden couldn't have been more explicit. It was not our way of life. It was the fact that we were interfering all over the world and had the United States military might in some of the most sacred Muslim holy lands. Doesn't justify it, but that's why he attacked us. It wasn't because of our way of life. There's a reason why they didn't attack Denmark. There's a reason why they didn't attack Australia. They didn't attack us for our way of life.
We will be going back into Afghanistan as we went back into Iraq and Syria.
Hang on, are you seriously think the United States will once again, in a foreseeable future, put troops back into Afghanistan?
We'll have to, because the threat will be so large. Why did we go back to Syria and Iraq?
All right, I can't take any more of his stupidity, but I just wanted to give you a small sampling. That's Lindsey Graham out there banging the war drum. Can't wait to get us back into another war. Trump also said we should go back into Afghanistan, which is what he does. He just says the opposite of what, in this case, the guy who beat him is saying, even though he was the guy who wanted to pull troops out and said, no matter what, Biden can't stop me from pulling the troops out. Remember that? And here is a despicable soundbite from two despicable people. It's Candace Owens talking to Larry Elder. He, of course, is the front runner to beat Gavin Newsom. Hopefully, according to folks in California listening to the show, they said it's looking pretty good for Gavin Newsom, but who knows? This is scary because Larry Elder, a black man, is saying, whoa, if you want reparations is a slippery slope, let's not forget about the slave owners that lost their land. Yeah, that's what he said. Here, I'll let you listen.
Do you know that the slave owners were compensated? After they lost their quote-unquote property, the government compensated slave owners.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so when people talk about reparations, do they really want to have that conversation? Because, like it or not, slavery was legal. And so their property, their legal property, was taken away from them after the Civil War. So you can make an argument that the people that are owed reparations, and not only just black people, but also the people whose, quote, property, close quote, was taken away after the end of the Civil War.
That's a great point. I didn't know that. That's a great point. It's a lot of great points made by a despicable guy. Just terrible. Continue to pay attention to the recall election in California. Election day is September 14th. And as of right now, it looks like Gavin Newsom is going to be able to hold on to that office, according to 538.com. But who knows? Polling is crazy, and we've seen it be wrong before. So make sure you vote, California, if you haven't already. All right, that's all the news clips I got for you. Now it's time for rapid fire headlines. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the news dump. And here's another excellent news dump jingle written by listener Dan McDonald, performed as always by Pete Coe.
12 Swiss heli cows dangling, looking kind of frump. If one falls, we eatin' steaks during today's news dump. Tasty.
Okay, thank you, Dan and Pete. Apparently that story was inspired by a tweet from CNN. Headline was, every year around 1,000 cows from higher pastures make their way to the Unabuden Valley. While most animals walk this route, some injured or heavily pregnant cows are airlifted. That was a story. Hashtag helicows. Or maybe helicopters is better, said Dan. Thank you, guys. All right, time for the news. Thank you, Dan and Pete. You guys are crazy. All right, first of all, let's start with news out of Virginia, where they are going to be removing a 12-ton Robert E. Lee statue in the state capitol this week. The statue along Richmond's Monument Avenue, set to come down Wednesday. It's probably a hollow statue. I wonder if anybody's going to care. Of course, that's where they had the revolution of white supremacists as a result of that statue in the first place. Anyway, good job, Virginia. Don't dress in blackface, Mr. Governor. Thank you. Here's great news coming out of Australia. How about this story? A 3-year-old boy was found after 3 days lost in the Australian woods. A 3-year-old boy wearing just a sweatshirt and diapers has been found sitting in a creek and cupping water in his hands to drink 3 days after he was lost in rugged Australian woodlands. And I think the immediate question is, what's that kid going to be like the rest of his life when he's like 20 years old? He's going to look back, he's going to be so confident. Dude, I lasted in the Australian bush when I was 3. I had a diaper full of shit and hands filled with water. I am the man. I can overcome anything. I don't know why I didn't do that with an Australian accent, but I would have butchered it. All right, let's move on to Cape Cod, where shark tourism is growing. That's right, you heard me, shark tourism. 3 years after the first great white shark attack in generations, Cape Cod slowly embracing its shark reputation. I guess they aren't concerned about what that's going to do to folks who want to come and enjoy their great beaches. But then they made Jaws about that, too. Anyway, that didn't stop anyone. I mean, you never think it's going to be you who gets attacked by the shark, right? I bet. Ted, anyone attacked by a shark? I don't always comment when people pass away, but a lot of folks talking about actor Michael K. Williams, best known for his role as Omar Little in The Wire, who passed away. He's 54 years old, instantly recognizable for a distinctive scar on his face. Started his entertainment career as a dancer, toured with George Michael and Madonna before landing acting roles, and, of course, burst into stardom on The Wire. Comedian and writer Trayvon Free tweeted, Michael K. Williams was a goddamn genius, a black queer icon who challenged the ideas of black masculinity at a time it wasn't easy, and a truly great dude. Huge loss. Somebody tell God Omar coming. I still haven't seen The Wire. I can't believe it. I know. Stop judging me, Tina. Speaking of actors, actor, author, director, food lover, sexy bartender, and dancer is the way that CNN writes it. Stanley Tucci revealed that he had cancer about 3 years ago, but he's been successfully treated. In an interview in a September issue of Virgin Atlantic's In-Flight magazine, he said he was diagnosed with a tumor at the base of his tongue and went through months of high-dose radiation and chemo and had a feeding tube. Oh, man, the Tooch. I love the Tooch. I used to work out with a Tooch at Equinox, where I was a personal trainer. Great guy. Interviewed him in Sirius a few times. Really liked him, so was happy to hear that he's okay. So that's another good news story. The world will get an update this Saturday on the red list of threatened species, the authoritative catalog of how many of the planet's animal and plant species are teetering on the brink of extinction due to human activity. Experts for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is holding a World Congress in the French city of Marseille, have assessed nearly 135,000 species over the last half century, and almost 28% are currently at risk of vanishing forever. Why can't it ever be our species who is responsible for most of it? That's a morbid thought. I'm sorry, folks. All right, here is final story for you. Final two stories? Yeah. A house made of shipping containers goes for millions. A 6,000 square foot Brooklyn home, apparently, has gone for $5 million. I mean, I love these shipping container houses. These are cool, but $5 million? Wow. And finally, the new Marvel film, Shang-Chi, upends thinking with Labor Day record. How about that? Historically, one of the sleepiest weekends at the movies, but Shang-Chi, the Legend of the Ten Rings, smash record for Labor Day openings with an estimated $71.4 million, supposed to be projected like $90 million by the time the weekend's over. And my daughter Ava and I are going to see it, hopefully this week. We've not been to the theater since the pandemic broke out, so planning on picking a day and time when no one's there and going to see this movie. All right, well, I hope you had a good weekend. Sorry about those noises. I'm not even going to edit them out. I'm going to leave them in there for you to make fun of. I just had to clear my throat before I introduce our first guest on today's show, who is one of your all-time favorites, who joins me probably once a month. He is an author, he is a professor, and a political commentator, and his book, American Rule, is now out on paperback. We talked a little bit about what's new. You need to subscribe to him on his Substack, as well as listen to his podcast. All of that is linked in the show notes. The podcast, the Muckrake podcast he does with Nick Halseman. I'm going to be joining those guys again at the end of the month we talked about. And I just love talking to him. So much to talk about with Jared Yates Sexton. We had a great conversation. As always, he's on Twitter, where he's prolific and excellent, at JY Sexton. Here we go. Congratulations. The paperback of your amazing book is out, and apparently, as I've been listening to the podcast and following you on Substack and Twitter, there are new chapters. American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed its People. It is out. You can get it, and congratulations. What's new in it?
Thanks, man. So the paperback addiction, the paperback edition.
I'm addicted.
Has an additional chapter that deals with the January 6th insurrection, attempted coup, Trump's attempts to overthrow the election, and also the coronavirus pandemic. And we added that in there because those three things really encompass what the book was talking about, which was this constant drumbeat towards authoritarianism, the destruction of open society, this radicalization along the right, and how a lot of what has happened in America over the last few years are repercussions of things that happened in our history. They're echoes of places that we've been, plus also right-wing white male attempts to regain the power and influence that they had before things like civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and voting rights as well. So, yeah, it ended up being a pretty big coda for the entire book.
I feel like I believe and agree with you when you use this refrain, as well as others, about those of you who have forever and still think everything will be all right, everything's going to work out, are wrong. And which is why, I was just telling Jared off the air that I was being recruited to run for town council. Like, this is why I'm personally getting more involved. I don't know if I'll run or not, but it's a little too late. But it's not going to be all right. What do you mean by it's not going to be all right? And what have you been predicting and saying? How are we seeing some of these things play out?
Well, going back to the chapter, I think on January 20th, when Biden, of course, took the oath of office, there was this, I don't know how else to put it, but there was like this groundswell of an idea that finally, now that there was a president coming into office who wasn't Donald Trump, that he had been voted out, that it was just going to lead to this automatic renewal, to America. Meanwhile, like, the National Guard is camped outside of the entire ceremony. People are having to socially distance and wear masks. Things didn't get fixed on January 20th, right? In fact, we've actually seen things in a lot of ways grow worse over the past few months. This idea that things are just going to return, it basically treated Donald Trump like he was an aberration, like he was the disease, not a symptom of a larger disease. And we have been living in this really terrible, poisonous delusion that the only things wrong with America are things like Donald Trump being elected. And, if only Democrats will play hardball or whatever, when in fact we have a lot of institutional rot and decay that is leading us towards militarism, authoritarianism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. But a lot of people, I think, want to believe that things are just going to be okay because they're afraid of actually changing anything, because their wealth, their power, their influence, it all relies on those systems of power remaining intact.
My opinion has always been it's the media's fault. It's the media's fault. I even think Republicans would be a lot more reasonable because their big donors want them to be more reasonable on things like immigration. They would be way more reasonable. There aren't very many corporate interests who are anti-immigration. They want that cheap labor. They want to normalize it and so on. And Tucker Carlson went to Hungary, and you covered this extensively in your writing and on the podcast. And I talked here with Ruth Ben-Ghiat about it that week, but I think it's really important to stay focused on who the most influential people in media are and what they are saying, because if you want to know what's kind of going to happen or what direction at least the right and to some extent the country's going, just listen to those guys because they really are telling you, I feel.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in all of that. So on one hand, you're exactly right that corporations do not care for a lot of the rhetoric that the Republicans are peddling. And it's not from an ideological purpose, but because corporations don't want to be branded as being regressive or oppressive, right? It actually knocks down on the amount of people who are going to buy their products. Meanwhile, a lot of the Republicans, you're exactly right, will rail against, immigration. Most of them don't have a problem with immigration. Most of them are the people who want cheap labor to come up from the southern border, but they have to signal to their base, right? They have a lot of white Americans who are terrified and worried. So they have to make all of these continual appeals to that base to say, no, we're going to protect the border. We'll keep these things from happening. Meanwhile, they're like, come on in. We're going to pay you very, very little to get things done. The problem is that appeal from a lot of Republicans, right? The people that I think people who are more in denial would call them responsible Republicans or establishment Republicans. You know what I mean? Those people, by signaling to the base, are making it possible for people like a Tucker Carlson or a Stephen Miller to up the ante. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're afraid of people of color replacing white people? Guess what? We've got some solutions for that. And with somebody like Tucker Carlson, who, this, he's worked for every network that there is. Yeah. He's changed his personality constantly, but he has finally settled on one that I think is his true self, which is a white supremacist. And by going over to Hungary and dealing with Viktor Orban and Orbanism in Hungary, he has made a case to the Republican base which says, hey, you know how everybody's been telling you the apocalypse is coming and you're going to get your guns taken away, America's going to be replaced, white people are being replaced. Guess what? Over in Hungary, they figured it out. And all you have to do is overthrow elections, disenfranchise people, rein in the press, don't have any individual liberties anymore, and also go after and harass people. And they're like, look what Orban did over here. We can do that here, which is unfortunately what has been opened up by those appeals that we're talking about.
I think almost every Republican or conservative idea has been wrong, and I could criticize all of them. But I do think that Republican governors and even state houses were generally speaking not anti-vaccine. And the reason they became anti-vaccine is because it gets great ratings and it gets people scared when you are Alex Jones or even Joe Rogan now or others. And so that's what I mean by they're not trusting their own public health experts that they frankly appointed. There aren't, these aren't scientists. I mean, there are some quacks, obviously, and they get signal boosted by these right wingers. But that's an example of what I mean. Like, they're not listening to sane experts there because they're being driven by the media.
Well, and I live in Georgia, and Georgia is a really good example of what's happening here. I'm actually working on an article right now about this. You have a governor like Brian Kemp, right? And Brian Kemp, when he got elected, people might not remember this, but he surfed on that Trump wave. Like, he wanted it bad. And the way that he won the primary and eventually the governorship, besides stealing it from Stacey Abrams, is he would do all these ads where he's like posing with shotguns and, getting in his big truck, and he's going to, quote, round up illegals and drive them to the border. He's the governor of Georgia. And in Georgia, we have a lot of corporations, including Coca-Cola, Delta. Then on top of it, you've got Hollywood, who has made Georgia basically its second home in America. So he has to do two things at once, right? He has to signal to the Trump base, which has all but rejected him at this point, while also maintaining a pro-business, semi-progressive environment, right? So you have Brian Kemp, who the other day shut down Georgia government to allow people to go and get vaccinated, but he can't talk about it too much, right? He can't do the mask mandates. He can't do any of that stuff. He has to straddle both worlds. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis is not straddling any worlds. He's making his decision that he wants to be the next president of the United States. So as a result, he has to push pedal to the metal. We're not doing masks. We're not doing vaccines. Yeah. I don't care how many children die. But it's because of that, because they want to be seen as the embodiment of that rhetorical appeal that we're talking about.
That rhetorical appeal being the constant screaming and fear-mongering from influential people in media is overwhelmingly on the right, I would say.
Exactly. And so, like, with somebody like a DeSantis is trying to sell himself as the guy who's going to take Trump's torch, but he'll be more competent, right? He's not going to do all of the Trumpian sort of stuff that Trump did, but he'll go ahead, he'll do pro-business, he'll go ahead and say that experts don't know what they're talking about. He'll push ivermectin if you want him to, whatever you want him to do, but he'll be more professional than Trump was. But what we're actually watching, and I think we talked about this when we were on here with a while back, this environment in right-wing media constantly pushes further and further right because of marketing demographics, because that's how you keep people watching. That's how you keep people investing. It's the terror of it. They're going to put you in camps. They're going to take your guns. They're going to hand your wife over to the New World Order. People of color are going to show up in your neighborhood and bring about, Sharia law or whatever they want to make up. And so what you have and what we've seen is an evolution on the right where you went from a bunch of people like a Newt Gingrich, right? And Newt Gingrich was like a pro-business Looney Tune, but he also started appealing to like militia groups and talking about the New World Order. And that, of course, leads to the Tea Party, and that leads to Trumpism. And this next evolution isn't necessarily going to be people who are just appealing to that. We have a lot of people who believe in this shit, and a lot of people who are like living it and breathing it and existing within it. So it's a long, tireless march to the right, for sure.
Years ago, I interviewed both Tucker Carlson and Newt Gingrich at separate times. Newt a couple times, I think. And I'll never forget, because I was no match for them. It was no match. I mean, granted, I was a lot dumber and less experienced, but I don't know that I would be today. I mean, Gingrich came into my studio and just threw me right off. He knew exactly what he was doing. They're very, very effective communicators, and they know how to, get people absolutely fired up and terrified, which brings me to what's happening. I think I didn't agree with some of your predictions about how things were going to play out, because I couldn't see them. I don't think that you could specifically see them either, and you would throw out a lot of hypotheticals. But now one of the kind of hypotheticals that I think that you were talking about is happening, and I'm wondering how closely you're paying attention to it, because I fear it's the most important thing, which is at the school level, where the Board of Education is made up of volunteers. Nobody's going to want to volunteer if people are physically threatening them and their families and live in that community with them. At my own board, I'm not saying that's happened in terms of the threats, but we've seen it in other places. But at our meeting I went to, and folks have been listening to me last week know about this, and it was crazy. And all the things that you've heard nationally, I heard right here in my town about ivermectin or ivermectin or horse shit, whatever they're taking, all the way to CRT. And I'm wondering how closely you're paying attention to, on the local level, these schools and what the strategy there is.
Oh, I think it's the canary in the coal mine. And, we on the Muckrake podcast, we talk a lot about this through the lens of Howard Beale on the 1970s movie Network. Yeah. And there's this moment where Howard Beale, who is this pundit or news anchor who goes insane on the air, at one point he starts screaming, you know what? Eventually you just go in your home and you say, leave me alone. You can do whatever you want. Just leave me alone in my own home. And that's sort of where we're reaching at this point. Open society is being shredded to the point where if you are a doctor, if you are a scientist, or if you're an elected official, you basically at this point are being absolutely assaulted, intimidated, and stalked by people who are being radicalized and pointed like a weapon by a very specific right-wing movement. And in this case, whether it's CRT or masks, all of these made-up outrages, right? These are being pushed by right-wing think tanks. These are people, by the way, who are like academics who are studied, all of these people who get in a room and they say, okay, we need to get people to do X, right? How do we get people to do X? And obviously the answer is always intimidation or fear, right? So how do we take over school boards? How do we make sure that we can indoctrinate the future? How do we control curriculum? Well, let's create this critical race theory outrage, which, by the way, wasn't about CRT. It was about a phrase that sounded scary, right? That encompassed all these ideas.
Yeah, I feel like I heard you guys talking about it kind of being astroturf, right? I mean, this guy from the Manhattan Institute, Rufo or whatever, that was the most effective thing that I've seen the right do in years. And we'll talk about abortion in a minute, but is that right? It's kind of like...
Yeah. So what happens, the way that the right wing works at this point, because so far we've been talking about politicians, and politicians are more or less the PR agents of this movement, right? And you're exactly right with Newt Gingrich. Like, Newt Gingrich is a brilliant person who never understood that he needed to shut up every now and then and not say everything that entered into his mind. Like, he's an incredibly smart dude, but then the next thing you know, he's talking about moon bases.
Yeah, he goes
He goes too far. But now they have been replaced by people who have no idea what they're talking about. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene has no grasp of public policy. Right. Madison Cawthorn has no grasp on public policy. We have people who go out and they're very good at grifting off of this fear. Meanwhile, the people who are actually pulling the strings among the Republican Party and the right wing are what we would call libertarian billionaires, right? These are the people that are encompassed by people like the Koch brothers and how they created the Tea Party. So they funnel millions, if not billions of dollars into universities, think tanks, all these different groups. And they say, hey, we want lower taxes. And they're like, oh, that's great. We'll tell everyone the New World Order is coming. And so eventually what happens is they astroturf all of these movements. The CRT outrage, the mask movement, all of that is about taking over school boards, and it's about changing the curriculum. So what your children are taught isn't real history, isn't real economics, isn't, and you keep them pliable. So what we're actually talking about is a multi-tiered movement that, and by the way, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff. This isn't smoky rooms. This is all on the record, all very obvious if you know where to look for it. And so what we're watching is that this fear mongering is being used to try and pursue X or Y as a means.
Which leads me to the other big issue, that big win for the right on abortion, which they've been working on for over 30 years. And we can talk about its origins and how that also became a way to get people fired up. And I mean, everybody does this, but taking an issue and creating this wedge issue, which wasn't really before. I mean, The problem is, I feel like on the right, certainly, they just manufacture things and then they just test them and they work and they're really making up a lot of things. Whereas, on the left, we're like screaming about the importance of diversity and inclusion, or more importantly, about science like climate. And they just deny it, or they deny COVID even. And so it always works. And tell me, your thoughts on the win they had in Texas and the Supreme Court on abortion, because it's just so emblematic of so much of what you've been writing about.
Well, I want to go ahead and start with the history of abortion in this country, which is, most people don't understand this, but it wasn't that controversial when it actually occurred. There was a consensus among Democrats and Republicans that this probably should be legal, or at least Republicans thought that it was a losing issue. But what ends up happening is that the evangelical right, and most people don't know this, the animating issue on the evangelical right was not abortion. The original was desegregation. It was when all of a sudden they started making sure that schools were desegregated. And this is why you have all these private schools, is you have a bunch of segregation academies that started figuring out how to get away from the federal government telling them that they had to desegregate and make, equal circumstances. So eventually they figure out that abortion makes for a really good cudgel issue. And the whole point here, and why we've seen this become the issue that it is it goes back to everything that we're watching now, like QAnon, which is, they're not just corrupt, they're not just bad politicians, they're killing people. They're drinking blood, they're doing this. With abortion, they turn it much more into almost like a moral apocalypse, right? And they realized all these things, tanks and all of these experts realized that it polled well among the right. It hit the right buttons. It made the right fears. So what's happening in Texas is also incredibly concerning, because you have to understand that the law is a social construct. It's just a thing that we all agreed on and was, construed and constructed in a certain way. They now have the Supreme Court, which they stole, to make sure that any progress, any reform is going to be deemed unconstitutional. And meanwhile, any of these legal or illegal fictions that they come up with, which is what happened in Texas, this law was created and crafted in such a way that the Supreme Court was like, we're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade, but you just found a loophole, in which, of course, was about citizens turning people in, right? The state's not doing it. The citizens are doing it. And immediately we knew what was going to happen, which was every right-wing state in the country was like, oh, there it is. We're going to do that. Done. We're going to go and do that. Right. So they've actually turned the law into their political weapon, and they have stalked the entire judiciary in the same way that they're now trying to stalk what we were just talking about, the school boards and the local commissions around this country. It was about creating their own backstop for power.
Yeah, and they've done a really effective job at that. The Fifth Circuit was, of course, the court that, and apparently that's pretty weighted with conservative justices appointed by conservative. Pretty wild. A lot of their judgments and outcomes allowing this to happen. So, where do we go from here on abortion and on what's next at the local level? I talked with Lala Wu of Sister District yesterday, and she, or last week, and she just talked about the strategy that Republicans have had for years to take over state houses, which they've been amazingly successful at. And it's hard to see progressives, much less, rank and file Democrats, doing that, making gains, certainly in red states where they've been so gerrymandered at state level. What do you think, where we go from here on that?
Well, the left has just fallen behind in terms of local and regional politics. That's been constant. The Republicans have outworked them in places where people didn't want to run, or they didn't want to organize, or that they, didn't necessarily have a conducive message. The problem here is that the Republican Party is historically unpopular at a federal level, at a national level. They really, along this current trajectory that they're on, particularly with the appeals that we've been talking about, they're not going to win except for things like the Electoral College and gerrymandering and disenfranchising. In this case, I think what we're watching with abortion is what a lot of us have been predicting for a while, which is that it's going to be hollowed out. They're not necessarily going to overturn Roe v. Wade. One of the long-going things among the Republican Party, and Reagan was the one who had this quote that is consistently echoed throughout history. When he got elected, someone was like, okay, you're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade, right? And he was like, are you crazy? I wouldn't get rid of Roe v. Wade. Like, it helps with fundraising. It helps with power. Right. And on top of that, do you want a bunch of people in the streets? You know what I mean? Like, do you want people actually protesting against this and organizing around it? What we're probably going to watch is this fictional legal idea, or the loophole that the Texas Republicans discovered. We're probably going to see Roe v. Wade hollowed out like a cavity, to the point where, red states, or so-called red states, are going to make sure that abortion is all but made completely illegal. And the idea, I think, that they're betting on is that people in blue states and or purple states are just going to leave it alone. And they're going to be like, okay, Roe v. Wade's still there. It's not infringing on me. That's the bet that I think the Republican Party is making, is that they can create these pockets of control in these red states. But I don't know that that's necessarily the truth. I mean, I've seen increased activity. I've seen a lot more energy in the past few days in reproductive rights than I've seen in many, many years.
Yeah, for sure. I hope that they've gone yet again too far, which is what the election of Donald Trump was, the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh. Activists and movements need to be, what would be the phrase to talk about how they keep the momentum. I don't want to be disrespectful to them, but it's hard to get, to recruit people to show up if it seems like everything's going okay. But you can't deny the elections, and you can't deny big, huge national stories like this in Texas. I hope it means they've gone too far on this issue, and it means they makes it harder for them to take back, say, the House or even the Senate in the midterms. That's what I hope, but I don't know.
Yeah, and if you actually look at this country right now, I kind of feel like, and I know, surprise, surprise, our media misses the narrative constantly. Basically, American politics has explained that 45% of the country is Democratic, 45% is Republican, and then there's like 10% independent, and they're just constantly battling over those 10%. That's not true. Right. The Republican Party is deeply, deeply unpopular right now. And going back to the idea of abortion, like, the overwhelming majority of Americans think that it should be a legal right. It's a vast majority that believe that. This is not a popular thing. I think it is being seen as taking a step too far or some sort of an offensive maneuver. The question at this point isn't necessarily if that's going to lead to a pushback in whether or not it's congressional seats or Senate seats, because with Trumpism, particularly, I'm about to say post-Trump, but is anything ever post-Trump? You know what I mean? Like, he's probably going to run in 2024. His influence is still very strong. But the further and further that the Republican Party goes right, the more unpopular they're going to be, which is going to lead to a crisis for the party, which is, if you're not going to win elections anymore, and you do have a certain amount of power in certain places, what do you do? And what history tells us you do is you oppress, you intimidate, and you overthrow democratic institutions. So that is, unfortunately, the trajectory that we're on. And I think people who believe that things are just going to be okay are sort of looking beyond the horizon, thinking, well, if they lose enough races, they'll have to figure this out. But that is not who the Republican Party is.
Yeah. I want to spend this last part of our conversation talking about national security as it relates to the end of the Afghan war. Had Spencer Ackerman on the show a few weeks ago. I think his book pretty much covers it all. I think Andrew Bazovich's book covers it as well. He goes even further back and talking about kind of the war in the Middle East and so on. But last night I had what I thought was a clever tweet. I think it got 4 to 7 likes. But basically, I watched a 9/11 doc last night. This one that was on Apple TV. It's pretty good. Talked to all the Bush administration people and got their point of view on the day, which I think was good journalism, despite I hate all of them. And I kept, living through 9/11, being in New York and all of that went with it for me personally, and my home, my city, and the reaction to it. It's all worth discussing right now as we're headed, to the 20th anniversary and the end of Afghanistan. But Jared, before I even got to it, my tweet was like, I'm watching this 9/11 doc and I can't stop thinking about how nobody really cares or thinks much about the fact that Russia interfered in our election in 2016. The reaction to 9/11 is something that we can and should talk about a lot. The lack of a reaction to the interference in our election by Russia seems like something we should still be continuing to discuss. And I feel like there's not a lot of discussion or investigation into it, and that concerns me. What do you think of should I not even juxtapose the two?
No, I think there's a lot of stuff that could be juxtaposed with 9/11. And going back to the idea of the media, one of the reasons why 9/11 was such a seminal event, besides the fact that it was obviously a massive national tragedy, is that it was such a massive national, international spectacle. One of the things about 9/11, and you'll notice that a lot of what these documentaries are talking about is watching it on the TV, experiencing it, seeing the second plane hit the tower. How did it feel when it occurred? And when you start to look at that and you start to actually take in consideration who Al-Qaeda was, how they were able to do this stuff. I want to say that the cost of the attacks of 9/11 were like $600,000. And what did it cause? It caused the Iraq War.
$1 million. You don't mean $600,000. You mean...
Oh, no. I'm talking about the cost of Al-Qaeda, how much it cost for Al-Qaeda to pull it off.
Oh, sorry. I think you meant like the cost of damage or something.
Well, but that's my whole point is Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and their financiers, I think they spent like $600,000 to pull off this wildly ambitious terrorist attack. And the entire point was to drag the United States of America into a prolonged conflict, to spend its money, to spend its blood, to spend its political capital. And we responded with trillions of dollars. We killed, God, we don't know how many people we've killed. Right. We've been active in hundreds of countries around the world, and we still can't even come out and say maybe we need to take a step back from that. Our media, by the way, over the past couple of weeks, has been hyperventilating, and in a weird consensus, they are all saying the exact same thing, which is, oh, we botched Afghanistan leaving there. Like, shouldn't we still be there? Shouldn't that still be occurring? And the whole point of it, and it goes back to your point, is that we have so many problems, Pete, that we're not taking a look at. Like, it just came out today that unemployment benefits are going to run out. Yeah. We have a bunch of people getting ready to get kicked out of their rented homes. The economy is falling apart. Not to mention that you want to talk about spectacles. New York City was underwater. Yeah. Like water everywhere. People were drowning in their basement apartments. And that was in New York City, the media capital of the world. And people have already kind of forgotten it. You know what I mean? Like now it just kind of didn't happen. The whole point is that we live in an accelerated environment where we have multiple crises that we can't pay attention to. Also, our elections and the infrastructure of our democracy. Yeah. Those things cannot compare to a Tuesday morning, towers on fire, people screaming, giant clouds of smoke, the Pentagon in flames. It was a rhetorical appeal that continues to echo through history, and we still aren't able to do it with it or any of the problems that it has compounded or hides now.
Yeah, you guys did a good job also covering the outcome of the latest IPCC study on climate change. I was like on vacation that week and have been pretty much looking away from it, but you just barely touched on that with the horrible storm in New York and obviously, down south as well. And it's just crazy to see the Northeast underwater and the West is burning and not have more coverage. It's just such a big, giant issue. And I guess it just doesn't get the kind of ratings that certainly Afghanistan and so many other issues do. So you don't see as much coverage. It's hard to talk about for people, but that's a huge and important issue.
Well, I just want to say that I'm also worried about that as well, because going back to the consensus within the media we were just talking about, it's nonstop talk about Afghanistan, about the decline of American power. Meanwhile, we have all these other issues that are taking place that aren't necessarily getting the attention and focus that they deserve. The thing that I'm terrified of, and this goes back to the post-Trumpian world and the further march to the right, I think Republicans are going to figure out that their only ticket to regaining power is by attacking Joe Biden, Afghanistan, the idea of American empire, redeeming American power, going more militant, going more towards jingoism and chauvinism. And I have to tell you, and I think you know this as well, there are plenty in the media who are going to march right along with that tune. Who are going to be more than happy to have a Republican who talks about flags and eagles and tanks and jet carriers, but are turned off by Donald Trump saying stupid shit and being an embarrassment.
I don't know. I have a hard time imagining American public opinion supporting a foreign intervention as large as we did in Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, it wouldn't take much of an event. And it would be weird, too, because you have these domestic terrorists all the time. So many, by the way, it's so not politically correct to talk about, but I don't give a shit. So many of these domestic terrorists are former military, Army and Marines especially. I just read about this Marine who he was a sniper, and he just killed 4 people yesterday. I mean, it's really, but the idea of a military intervention in a foreign country, it seems hard to wrap my head around how we could continue doing that even with Republican leadership. I don't know. How do you see it?
Well, I think one of the things that we don't really talk about much is how a superpower recovers from something like that. Like, eventually what ends up happening is you have this thing called revanchism that starts to sort of take over, which is like a lust for revenge or the idea of, a renewal. One of the reasons Ronald Reagan was able to gain the support that he did was he completely revisioned Vietnam. He went out and he said, you know what? We didn't lose the war. It was our generals who lost the war. It was the protesters who lost the war. And, this is a thing that you carry around and it makes you ashamed or it makes you question being American. Don't question being American, because once we feel a certain way as a nation, we're very quick to change the narrative and go in the opposite direction. It's the reaction and action. And in this case, I think things are ripe right now for the Republican Party sort of picking up that mantle. If they're smart, if they're worried about winning politics, that's like one of their few directions they can go in. I'm just hoping they don't figure that out.
Anything hopeful? Anything to be hopeful about here at the end?
I like you. I think what happened in Texas was an overplaying of a hand. And I think it made obvious very, very quickly the illegitimacy of the Supreme Court as well as the Republican Party. They have no plan, no platform for making anybody's life better. The only thing that they can offer people is to prosecute and hurt the people that they don't like. And in this case, they did an incredibly unpopular thing. And I keep hoping that the outrage from it is going to turn into organization and some sort of an action from the grassroots level.
I don't know what the most effective messaging is, and I know this part of the law that allows people to turn people in, this vigilantes people are talking about, that's kind of unprecedented, it would seem. Maybe you've been studying history, I know, for your next book, but I kind of feel like the messaging should just be rape and incest. We know that most people, even that are anti-abortion, are not for that. Most people, maybe that's different, maybe I'm wrong, but I would just stay focused on even in cases of rape and incest.
Yeah, and the problem there is, of course, that people don't want to put that on a banner. You know what I mean? Like the issue there is that it doesn't really pass the media test.
I'm going to make T-shirts. Where are you on rape and incest? Just generally.
That's the shirt.
I wasn't done with it. Gonna have other things.
Okay, so it's going to have more talking points on. That's good. But I will say, though, that one of the things that we're going to find out over the next couple of years with these laws is that countries like the United States of America, they love turning in their neighbors. They love turning in their neighbors. And we've seen it. We've seen it throughout history that right-wing movements and counter-revolutionary movements, they love turning the people against each other.
You know, my neighbor turned me in for my shed.
I didn't know that.
You didn't hear about that? I had to take down like part of my shed. My neighbor turned me in. I didn't even know. It was up for 12 years, and she just had to take it down. Awful. Yeah, and she still has her Trump. She still has a Trump sign.
It's already happening, is what I'm saying. But we love that, and one of the reasons that the right wing loves doing that is because it erases any solidarity. You know what I mean? Is it causes people to not trust one another. It causes alienation. It causes atomization of society, which is where the right wing thrives. They cannot have people comparing notes and working together and organizing and forming communal trust, which goes back to the school boards. It goes back to local government. When people don't work together, that fear mongering, that sort of paranoia that they depend on, that's where that takes seed. But as soon as people trust each other and work together, that's the antidote to it.
So great to talk to you, man. I've missed talking to you. It's been a few weeks, and I've been love listening to the podcast, and everybody else should too, as well as subscribe to the Substack, support the Patreon, and definitely, if you haven't already bought the book, and even if you have, it's got new chapters, get the book. It's out in paperback. When is it available? Like, will it come to my house? American Rule.
September 14th.
You've joined me so many times here. Please go. There's a lot of ways to support Jared's work, but go buy that's I think the longest form I can get you in is my favorite form.
You're the best. Thank you, Pete.
And thank you for always doing this with the camera on your full body. All right, Jared Yates Sexton, as always, go subscribe to his Substack, listen to his podcast, follow him on Twitter, and get his book now out on paperback. Now joining me, very excited whenever he joins me as well. I always have a great conversation with journalism professor at the Newmark Journalism School in New York City, a national leader in the development of online news, blogging, and the investigated news business model for news, as well as just teaching good old journalism and all new journalism. It's Jeff Jarvis, everybody, the director of the Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the New School. We had a great conversation, as we always do. He's so good on Twitter. At Jeff Jarvis is what he is on Twitter. His blog, Buzz Machine. And I always love talking to him, and today was no exception. We had such a good back and forth on today's conversation. I hope you like it. Here we go with Jeff Jarvis. There he is. He's always ready. You can always talk with Jeff Jarvis about just about everything, and I'm very happy to have you. I'm happy to be here on my, quote, day off talking to you.
And there you are, the scourge of school boards and local politicians and idiots.
What are your thoughts on the BOE meetings and the outrage both over masking and, quote, critical race theory and what that means? Like, I feel this is very close to home because it's everywhere. These people going up to microphones and saying crazy stuff.
Those are two very different questions.
They are.
I just got into a discussion with somebody, Jessica Huseman, on Twitter. It was very nice and not much nicer than I am, saying that disapproving of people and shunning them isn't going to work. And my response is, we've now tried that for 18 months. And so we're now at a time when, to my mind, the only solution is mandates and shunning and economic punishment. And the trolls came after me when I said that on Twitter, but screw them, man. They're killing people. So on that side, I'm sorry, but you should lose your job if you're not going to be vaccinated, and I don't care.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where I keep thinking about this. There's so many other vaccines that are mandated for your child to go to school. We can talk about places like where you work, and for staff, but I mean, if you have to get vaccinated for everything else, why is it so radical to mandate a vaccine for something that is this contagious and deadly?
Yeah. Critical race theory is a little different. It's harder to mandate that, though, of course, we liberals will try to. And so I got into a discussion with somebody else on Twitter. They're not always dumb discussions. They're good discussions, kind of like, okay, smartass, what are you going to do about authoritarianism and idiocy around the world? And there's only one answer to me, which is education, and that's not a quick solution. I'm curious here. I'm going to go off on one of my tangents. I'm reading Richie Robertson's The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, a nice thick book.
Yeah.
And it's made me wonder, what would Enlightenment journalism look like? What would the Enlightenment internet look like? What would it look like to say that we exist for a reason, which is to enlighten people, to truly educate them, to have values, to enforce those values. And in this time of late, when we see idiots like J.D. Vance, who you've gone after quite properly, and I'm happy you do, choosing to be idiots, choosing to be willful idiots, it's a reverse course from the Enlightenment. And what do we do about that? I'm not sure what we can do about that except to try to push back toward education.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a question of what is education now. I mean, this constant questioning of expertise and educators. I mean, when it comes to schools, I am going to continue to advocate that we let teachers teach and let parents parent. And when you have a question about something that your children are learning, by all means, ask a question about it. But it can't be done on Twitter. And so I think that there's got to be a lot, damn train, there's got to be a lot of credit given to teachers and professors and experts. And I don't know how to argue. And
to our students who will, I teach graduate school. So I always tell the students, you're not going to hear one right answer. You're going to hear a lot of differing answers. And it's up to you. That's the whole point of this. It's up to you to decide and to decide what it is you need to know to decide.
And it's up to teachers to create that conversation. In my BOE comments, I shouted out my daughter's last year global histories teacher because I heard him because she was doing school remotely, so I would hear his lessons, and I said this guy you never knew what he thought because he was creating a conversation with the students, and he's the best social studies teacher I've ever heard, and it got back to him, which was great because it made him feel good. But the point is,
I'm almost afraid that if you like him, that means he's going to get fired.
That's been known to happen. So I'm just really worried about that constant question. I mean, at that meeting, this guy screamed, these two doctors went up to talk about COVID protocols, and he screamed, "The doctors are political." And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Not sure what that means at this point.
What amazed me about your performance there was that you left and went back.
Yes.
Right. You were so motivated. Do you think it accomplished anything?
Yes. Yes, I think it did. I think most people are scared to talk at those, and I think I'm not. And I did. I wish I would have been a little bit more eloquent even, but no, I went home and I kept watching it on TV because it was so late and I had to come home to work. And I was like, if my COVID, basic uncontroversial science remarks are going to get heckled, then when we get to race, I'm screwed. And what difference am I going to make? I went home and I watched some lady ranting against even teaching diversity and inclusion. And Jeff, I had already had 2 beers in me and an empty stomach. I probably shouldn't have got back in the car, but I raced back over there. I was on fire. I was on fire, but I did, I had to kind of keep a cap on it. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it makes a difference. I think you have to, I looked up all these Baldwin quotes. I actually reached out to Eddie Glaude. I said, what should I say at this? And he sent me a Baldwin quote, which I couldn't use. I was like, I can't use that one, Eddie. That's not going to go over well. The myth of America or something about that. But I think that you just have to, all those quotes are talking about people being quiet. As long as you're going to, Dr. King, if you're going to be quiet, I forget those quotes, what they are off the top of my head, then you're part of the problem.
Eddie's great point, and I'm a huge Eddie Glaude fan, as are you. His great point is we've got to recognize that when we see this bad stuff happening, this is us.
Yeah.
And it's an unpleasant mirror to have.
Yeah.
But that's where we need. By the way, the other thing I love respect about Eddie, when I met him back when I used to be on MSNBC, and I haven't been on through the pandemic, when we had that lovely Saturday morning show.
Yeah.
And I was honored to run into him in the green room. And he said he always tries to bring text to an appearance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And it's just so amazing how he educates in the appearances. Yep. He brings a quote, he brings an author, he brings a thought, he brings text.
He's one of those guys that must be torn. I mean, I guess I am too, but I'm not Eddie Glaude Jr., let's be clear, that as a Princeton professor of religion and everything that he teaches, he must be torn to go on and only get a few minutes at knowing that that's not the most effective way to communicate, which is why bringing a quote, bringing text really is a great thing to do when you have such a short period of time to communicate with your audience.
I'm sure he must get some crap from some of his colleagues who say you shouldn't be, talking to the masses, but he clearly sees the power and opportunity.
Yeah, I'm glad.
And, when somebody when Nicole Wallace lets him go on, those are beautiful moments. Yep. Those are amazing moments.
Yep. And it's great. It's great radio. Same thing with Ellie Mistal. I mean, I keep going after,
Oh, he's got to get his own show somewhere. Somewhere.
I even said, I'd watch him play video games. I'd watch him yell at his TV. I'd watch him just eat. I'd watch him do anything.
I'd also watch the Ellie Mistal parenting lessons.
Yes. Love it. So what do you say to the argument that when my kids are going to school and they're learning these things and all these diversity and inclusion and things that they're teaching about race and history, they're making my kids hate themselves and feel guilty about who they are? What do you say to that argument?
Listen, I'm an old fart. For those of you on audio, I'm an old fart. And I was raised in this country in the time of the belief in the melting pot. And my parents, who were raised by racists who advanced far beyond them, and I'm proud of them and proud of what they tried to inculcate in us, still had that 50s, 60s view of the idea that we would be colorblind. And it took me until recently to realize how racist that is. Because what it says is, it's going to be okay when you're all like us, those who are in power, right? And when you all just try not to stop being different and we all melt together, it'll be okay. It wasn't really about respecting difference. It wasn't really about respecting cultures. My life is so much richer teaching in a school where the students constantly teach me about their lived experiences and their cultures and their views. It doesn't make me hate myself. It also says, and this is part where Eddie Glaude says, we can't advance farther until we acknowledge who we have been as a nation. I compare and contrast with Germany, which has had no choice but to acknowledge the sins of various eras there. And when I go there, I'm always amazed at how it's not true all across Germany. It's not true in Munich at all, where nothing ever happened. But in Berlin, they wear all their scars on their sleeves. Everything is public. Yeah. Well, there's World War II. There's the Holocaust. There's the Stasi. Yep. Can't hide it from you. And we have to acknowledge it. And I went to the Stasi headquarters the last trip and watched a high school class sitting there, half bored, of course, because high school students are, but realizing this is part of their education. This is part of what they do. You can't advance past until you acknowledge that. And that's the problem. Critical race theory isn't about making people hate whites or whites hate themselves. It's about acknowledging the structural advantage we've had. And at work, the thing that I've learned more than anything else, and I've not learned very well, and I've learned very late, is about sharing power. And, you know, you're excellent at that, especially on matters masculine and feminine, that's the joy and the opportunity. And it's not diminishing of us to share it. I had a conversation there. There was a great, I've got it right here. There was a great essay I happened across by Kyla Wazana Tompkins called The Shush. And you can get it for free online. The Modern Literature Association, whatever it's called, because I'm not really an academic, but at PMLA. She's a literature teacher. And I loved the essay, and I tweeted it, and she DM'd me and said, you know, thanks for the tweet. We got into a discussion about the academe and journalism. And she said that on the other side of sharing power is abundance. We hold on to on this side of it, we hold on to it as if it's a scarcity. But when we share it, we potentially enter into so much more. And that's a lesson that's very hard to learn for those who've had the power. And what do we see happening? You and I have talked about this time and time again. The old whites are burning the fields so they don't share the crops with those who follow.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have lived that for, you know, most of my career, just trying to open doors and create opportunities for other people has 100% come back to me in several different ways. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it comes back in a way you're not expecting, but it's never once. I don't feel like I've ever lost any of my influence, any of my quote power, any of my success by opening the door for other people. I've totally benefited from it, but I guess maybe it's not natural for people to think that way. Maybe we're brought up to be more selfish than selfless. I don't know, but I personally have lived it. It's been great. It's really been helpful for me to do, you know, help other folks and create opportunities. It doesn't seem very, it shouldn't be noble or generous. It's just, hey, it could be selfish. This will come back to you. It's a good thing to do.
It is truly enlightened self-interest. Yes.
For sure. I think. Yeah. So I wanted to also ask you, of course, about the New York Times, which you've been tweeting quite a bit about. For their treatment of specifically of Joe Biden. There's been a lot of controversy about, in an article specifically and others articles, a lot of articles written about Joe Biden talking about his son and his losses to others. And what is your concern about the journalism, about the headlines, about the articles about this issue?
Peter Baker especially wrote the latest one. There have been others. The latest was basically saying, in its subtext, stop talking about your dead son. Like it's we're tired of it, or it's inappropriate, or it's not what you should be doing, or it's not right for the audience, or whatever. I don't care. This is the same publication that accused him basically of not being empathetic enough after Afghanistan. It's the same publication that thought somehow, was it the Post or the Times had the headline that the pullout was unceremonious. Like, what do you expect? A fife and bugle corps?
Red carpet.
We lost a war. It's over. We should have lost it. We should have lost it 10 years ago. We left. We got out 100,000+ people. It's amazing. But the Times' expectations, its effort to prove that, well, no, we're not liberal, because look how mean we are to our own, liberals. They think it's being subtle. They think it's being nuanced, and it's not. It's being harmful. And I try to defend the Times because I think it has been the best that we have, but it gets harder and harder. The Post, I think, is now a better paper than the New York Times under Marty Baron. He's gone now. We'll see what happens. It wasn't perfect either, but the Times just frequently disappoints. That's not to say that there aren't good journalists there and there isn't good journalism there. There is, but it frequently disappoints. What's your view?
my longer view is I'm not as concerned about the Biden thing. I think it's terrible. I'm more concerned about some of the reporting on Afghanistan, but more than anything else, I think just a lack of, and I shouldn't say I haven't taken it all in to give it enough context. But so whether it's the Times or CNN or anywhere else, I mean, it's September. It's 20 years ago. It was 9/11. I've been thinking a lot about that as we do this time of year, and I think there hasn't been enough attention paid to Bush and Cheney and others in terms of why we got in there to begin with, and hearing all these same old arguments to stay. I've been really disappointed by the cheerleading for more war from a lot in the media. I've seen a lot of that on CNN, which has been really disappointing. And so that's been...
Yeah, well, also MSNBC, right? Their chief foreign correspondent has been outright hawkish.
So Engel, he used to be the most respected, one of the most respected foreign correspondents because he did a good job at reporting what was happening on the ground where he was. And, as happens to seemingly a lot of reporters, he got to be a big deal, and he really started editorializing in his dispatches on TV.
He also got, and I understand this. I mean, my main response in Twitter, like who cares, is give the man literally a break, give him a vacation. He needs to, this has been a stressful period. He needs to decompress from that because it's getting to him. And let me confess here. I was at the World Trade Center on 9/11. I survived, obviously, but barely. I came out of it in the time afterwards, frightened and angry. And I supported going to Afghanistan. I probably would still support that for a short period. I then made the mistake of then believing Bush and the New York Times on Iraq, which was a huge mistake, and I'll always regret that. So it's not a defensive angle; it's an understanding angle. I've been there too. I've been there in a position where my emotions got the better of my intellect, and he's there in the thick of it, and so I understand how that can happen. But he has a role as a journalist. The New York Times has a role as journalists. And they present a cracked mirror of the world. They go and talk to, like the Times did a feature last week, on a UFO conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And my response was, this is not the time to be doing cute features about conspiracy theorists, right? What does that tell the world is that believe in a conspiracy theory, you can get on page 1 of the New York Times in a friendly manner. It's why does it exist? Why does the Times exist? Why does journalism exist? I don't think we ask that anymore. That's what we ask in our engagement journalism program. That's what we get the students to challenge. But I think the Times has lost its way. So, yeah, I'm disappointed.
I share your disappointment, and I've been following, your tweets and others about a lot of this report. And I agree. It's always this kind of like trying to bend over backwards to be critical of Democrats so that they don't look like the liberal newspaper. And I'm happy to be critical of Democrats and liberals whenever it's warranted. Certainly when it's, inconsistent or hypocritical or whatever. But it just seems, pretty ridiculous. A lot of this reporting. Also, I was thinking about how, Thomas Friedman is still a columnist there. And the guys, some of these people that have been so wrong for so long don't deserve to be invited on a show or to have a column. And the people who have been so right for the entire time, they do not get invited on these shows to talk about foreign policy. John Bolton was on CNN last week. H.R. McMaster, and then even worse, some of these generals or former generals, military members who have actual stakeholders. They're stakeholders in companies that benefit from
undisclosed
war. General Keane, I think, is that guy. It was one off that comes off the top of my head, but it's ridiculous that you would ever bring them on without at least a disclaimer, right?
Yes, transparency. So here I am in a journalism school teaching journalists, and what I'm doing is trying to get them to question us old farts. I leave you out of the old fart, but I'm an old fart category. And why do we do what we do the way we've done it? And that's not the right way necessarily. And invent new ways and rethink what journalism can be and what its role in society is. It's not finding trend stories. It's not hot takes. It's not being critical of everyone so you can seem like you're smarter. It's not predicting things, especially in elections. It's not presenting skewed mirrors of the world in opinion polls that preempt the conversation they are meant to measure, as James Carey said. It is So what is it? Why are we here? What is it to do? I think it's to try to leave society better off. I think it's to support values, including science and justice. Is that? I think it's to illuminate and enlighten and educate. Is that propaganda? Maybe it is. I don't know, but I think we've lost our way.
I think it's also, though, the funding models are so skewed, and we can talk about the pros and cons, but I've been thinking a lot lately about doing something local and wonder if I could generate any revenue locally from a weekly dispatch. Because we've got, and you've written and talked about this for a long time, such a deterioration of local media covering the state house, much less your local town or county politics, which are so important, I'm learning. And it seems like it's very hard for anybody to do a good job, to be able to make any kind of living by doing what is considered potentially one of the most important roles in any functioning society, which is, the fourth estate, journalism on all these local town decisions.
I have this vision of you with a green eye shade on, a stogie out of your mouth, sitting before a linotype, getting this week's issue out. Yeah. I want to see you do that. And you can, right? The cost is I believe in what we obnoxiously call hyperlocal. Yes, you could absolutely get revenue.
Is anybody doing it? Doing a good job?
Tons are doing it. The thing is, it's very spotty. I wrote kind of a manifesto arguing this, called Geeks Bearing Gifts, that we published out of the school. It's not a real book, but you can see it online, where I argued for this hyperlocal view. And the model works. I can point you to examples where people do this, but it doesn't, it's spotty. And so it doesn't, one for one replace a Metro newspaper. It can't. The Metro newspaper, though, never really covered that level of local. My weekly paper here sucks. My Gannett paper here sucks. Pretty much, right? So we need that here. There's an effort at Temple University. A friend of mine named Aaron Pilhofer has something called the Tiny News Collective, which for something like $10 a month, next to nothing, you can get all the technology you need to publish on the web via Google Docs and do newsletters and do everything else, right? So technology is not a stop at all. Selling ads, pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Subscriptions, okay, but that kind of limits the impact. Contributions, that might work if enough people give you enough money, Patreon-like or Kickstarter, to support what you need. And because a lot of it you're going to be doing with your own sweat, and because you care, and because you'll soon be running for the Board of Education, God help us, then the costs can be minimal. I think you could do it, Pete.
Well, I'm definitely considering that. You've seen things like I can't stop thinking about like being a real journalist and doing real journalism where if, like, for example, there's this issue in my town about a zoning issue about a guy taking down public land, trees on public land. And if you were to try to get comment from all of the different interested parties, if you were legitimate enough and a certain party refused to talk to you, then they would look bad. Like, that's what journalism is supposed to do, is to objective journalism on an issue and a story. Let's go talk to the people, the witnesses, the interested parties, and get their side of it. Because what happens is people take to Facebook in every town in America and they give their side of it, which is not countered with the truth, and it's rumor and it's innuendo, it's bias, it's sometimes just made up. And then people live and die by that Facebook post about what happened with this land grab. And it's wild because there's no reporting. You don't know. So I think maybe someone trying to do something like that would maybe work. I don't know.
I absolutely think so. And even if somebody goes with goodwill to Facebook, if they don't have something to link to that says, I looked up the facts, here they are. If it doesn't exist, if the reporting doesn't exist, and they can't do that. You've hit my oof. I'd recommend Tiny News Collective at tinynewsco.org. I would also recommend looking at lionpublishers.com, which is the local independent online news collective. I can connect you with all kinds of people. And there's other interesting models, too. There's something called City Bureau in Chicago, which trains people to go and cover the meetings. What if you had a neighbor who went and you said, okay, your job, I'll pay you $10. Your job is to sit in the Board of Education meeting and just give me a rundown. Right. Give me the audio snippets. Maybe do a podcast. I've always long wanted, if I could get somebody to edit a podcast to the whole Board of Education meeting down to the 20 important minutes, I'd listen because I'm a citizen. Right.
Yeah.
So you could do audio. You could do podcasting.
Yeah.
You can collaborate with your neighbors. You can train your neighbors to do it. There's something in Detroit called Outlier Media that tries to answer people's questions by WhatsApp and by text. There's a lot of different methods out there now to enable you to do it differently. But yeah, keeping job one there, which is to give people the facts, so when they discuss it, at least they're discussing that.
I wanted to ask you about the Texas abortion law, your thoughts, your reactions to it, the run up to it, the reaction to it, the reporting of it. Where are we at this point, Jeff?
This is bash my own field day, so I'll keep it going. I think that we paid so much attention to other efforts. This was happening underneath. It was going on, and we didn't report it enough. And if there'd been more outrage, if we'd gotten companies to say, don't dare do this, if other things had happened, maybe there's a chance we could have stopped it. I don't think so. The Supreme Court, it just shows how it's all stops out now. And I don't know what we do. I don't know what we do about Manchin and company. But nothing depresses me more right now than this. Nothing makes me feel more that we've lost and we're not going to win for a couple generations and erase this than this. So I don't know. I'm pretty damn depressed. What about you?
I think that sometimes things need to get worse before they get better. It seemed, if you ask one of my favorite legal scholars who joins me on a regular basis, that this was destined to happen because of the way that Roe v. Wade was even decided, that eventually this was going to happen, especially because Republicans have been so organized to get judges on the court for so long. But the only two words that really matter, it's not this vigilante thing, which is so wild to think that they would even put that in there, but it's rape and incest. Yeah. Those are the only two words that I think people should be kind of focused on. And I think that maybe they went too far. And this was kind of the wake up call, that the resistance, if you will, that liberals needed, because a lot of people got comfortable after Joe Biden won and took a long, deep breath. And then you see something like this happen. Say, oh, let's get back to work. Let's organize. Let's fight, and let's do whatever needs to be done to try to reverse this. But it's going to take a long time. And I think people need to be honest with themselves about how long Republicans have been at work at winning.
You know, the thing that struck me, though, and in a prior show, I quoted Hannah Arendt talking about how in a totalitarian regime, people take on abstract notions over everyday concerns. But I don't believe that abortion is the most important thing in people's lives.
Right.
But it's been made into this abstract notion of war, where it supersedes everything else we care about. Our family's health, Lord knows these days, our well-being, jobs, all kinds of things. And I don't know how we get back to a shared reality, not of the facts, but simply of everyday concerns, the things you care about in your town. It's not critical race theory, and it's not even masks. It's, is my kid anxious? Is my kid learning? Does my kid have friends? Is my kid having a good time? Is my kid learning? Things about our jobs and our health, and we've lost sight of what I know we hold in common. And that's an indictment of my field. It's an indictment of our field, media. But if you came down from the proverbial spaceship, you would think that the only things that matter in this country, in this democracy, are abortion and guns. And it's just not true. But you'd be forgiven for thinking that based on what you hear.
Well, if you landed in Texas.
Yeah. Well, abortion, guns, and breakfast tacos, yes.
And immigration. I mean, but the one thing that you didn't mention is, do we want our kids safe? And I think that parents this generation are worried about things that aren't happening and not nearly worried enough about things that are happening to their kids. And I try to, help some of these very concerned folks rest easy. Your kid's not going to be kidnapped. Not going to happen.
Have you ever had Lenore Skenazy on?
Many times. Yeah. She radicalized me because it was when I was vulnerable to her teachings, because I already felt this way, but she had all the data and the sound arguments, against that kind of helicopter parenting that has so destroyed us. But, it goes back to media too, warning and, about this kid died today and what happened, or this kid got kidnapped. And it's just...
My fear is that I think that kids today are more anxious than certainly they were in my time. But my fear is the roots of that might be that they were coddled and cared for and cushioned so much. And if that's the case, then I blame my generation of parenting.
Well, they're also anxious, though, about shit that's not happening. My daughter will come and ask me about a thing, and I'm like, where did you hear that? It's like TikTok. I'm like, you don't have to worry about that. There's no what was the puppet thing? There's so many things that over the years they've come to me, and I'm like, have I not? I've done a poor job with you. You don't have the critical thinking skills to deduce that shit is crazy.
Yeah.
She's like, is Joe Biden a pedophile and a lizard? I'm like, no.
So do we?
I said, but mom is.
But does media make it her job to worry? Like, if I'm not worried about something, I'm not doing my thing. Surely I got to be worried about something. I'll go find something to be worried about.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, all the different kinds of media that they take in for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. When you think about when you or I, we have a lot more in common than we do apart, despite our minor age difference. It's just that we didn't have those things to worry about because you didn't even know they were happening. I mean, you made a comment about, I feel like you did on Twitter, about all these, all the violence in the stands at football games or on airplanes, or someone else did. And I'm like, is there more violence or are there more cameras catching it? And I'm not sure. I think there probably is more
data. There were some really good studies out recently. One about YouTube that found that with 300,000 users over 4 years, found that contrary to the presumption, YouTube doesn't radicalize people. Right? But there's this presumption it does. We all presume it. Well, let's see the data. And with the data, it said no. It said that there is a radicalization going on in a larger media ecosystem, of which YouTube is a part. But it's not blamable on YouTube directly, that people don't watch as much of this stuff as you think, that the algorithm doesn't promote what you fear. And that's not to say YouTube is blameless. That's not to say that YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter couldn't do a much better job and should. Yes, they should. But this presumption that that's the root of all of our problems, and if we just turn them off, everything would be okay. No.
Well, you skip TikTok.
I like TikTok.
Love it. Love it. What I'm getting is not what my kids are getting. That's the point. What I'm getting so much of is, and this is clearly because I've chosen it, I guess, the algorithm, right? I think it's someone he told me, and this would make sense, it's how long you watch a video for.
Yes.
So what I get a lot of is couples playing silly pranks on each other. That's how scandalous I am, apparently.
So I was talking to a friend of mine I was on the other podcast I do, This Week in Google, Leo Laporte, and he was kind of dismissing TikTok because he sees too many bikinis. I said, no. As soon as I see a bikini, I swipe immediately. I want to tell it, no, I'm not that kind of man. No, don't show it to me. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right. And you thus train it. I get all kinds of great music. I love the collaboration that occurs there. I think YouTube TikTok is fundamentally new in enabling its structure, people to collaborate on things.
Yeah, I want to learn a lot more about it. Maybe there's someone that you can refer me to. I also get a lot of videos of oiled, chiseled men shirtless, like a lot of them. I don't know what that's about because I'm certainly not looking at those for long periods of time or hours.
Well, if nothing wrong with it, if you do, nothing wrong at all.
Maybe I am. Maybe it's mostly dad bods that I want. That's all it is. It's about ambition. So before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about COVID and the latest there. And you study and do a good job at trusting the experts, certainly on this issue as much as everything else. And I'm seeing some of the people I respect the most fighting about these scenes we've seen at college football stadiums over this past weekend, especially where kids shoulder to shoulder going crazy. And my understanding is that there have not really been super spreader events where people are all outdoors, including Sturgis, where Sturgis was more about the indoor bars that everybody's going to all weekend. And you can imagine that happening at bars and so on college campuses. However, many college campuses are mandating vaccines. So I feel like I'm not sure, but what do you think, and what are you hearing about, young people who are mostly vaccinated gathering outside at a concert or at what we're seeing these video games and them going viral over the weekend because people are like, oh my God, you can watch the super spreader event occur. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if the data says that.
We don't know enough yet. And so when we don't know, I'm going to be more cautious.
Sure.
And so we don't really go on vacation. The only thing we do year after year is we go to the U.S. Open. I'm not there now, am I?
Right.
Just a great victory just occurred on the TV. So we have season tickets in Armstrong, the cheaper thing, right? We didn't go once. We sold as many as we could because we were nervous. Yeah, you're outside, but we saw those crowds getting out of the number 7 going into the Billie Jean King Arena. We just don't know enough. Now, I just had to make 2 round trips to Florida because I had to put my father into assisted living after having gotten breakthrough COVID at 95, fully vaccinated, because half the staff at his retirement home is unvaccinated. And so that pisses me off royally. It's irresponsible as hell. And I know somebody out there, well, people who are vaccinated can also spread it. Yeah, so we should all be cautious. So I'm still in cautious mode. I'm back in the classroom. I'm at CUNY at Newmark School. It was good to be in a classroom with people. It's weird to teach in masks. So third grade teachers have been doing that for a year and a half. So hats off to them. And I'm enraged at my school, at the university and the teachers union, of which I'm a member, that they're mandating vaccines for students, but not for faculty and staff, which is unfair and wrong.
Huh.
I think we've got to go overboard. I'm at the mind now where, United Airlines, people were giving Delta a lot of attention for fining people $200 for health insurance if they didn't get vaccinated. United says, your ass is out of here. You're fired. We need more mandates. We need the time for coddling people and trying to get them to understand is over. Some have legitimate questions. That's fine. But most who haven't taken it now, I think, are doing so out of an orthodoxy of disinformation, and it's time for us to protect ourselves. So I'm going to shun them and be angry at them, and I'm going to avoid them, and I'm going to avoid events still. And I could be wrong, but I'd rather be wrong and safe than, I don't know, I can make sure the logic of that.
Yeah. How's your dad doing?
He's doing well, except for the fact that he's now he has to leave his apartment. He's now in assisted living. He's 95 years old. He's lucky to be alive. He's the first one to say that. He doesn't complain or get angry. I do that on his behalf because I'm the angry one of the family. Thank you for asking. He's doing fine. But frankly, he's in assisted living a year or 2 ahead of what he would have had to be because COVID knocked him.
Let me also ask you about your house. I saw on, I guess, Twitter, your basement flooded, and you're not alone. People, thousands and thousands of people in the Northeast, and obviously everybody knows and was less surprised by what happened on the Gulf Coast in Louisiana because it happens every year. Seemingly gets worse and worse. But to have the Northeast get caught off guard that way and have so much damage, what is your reaction to the fact that your basement flooded, and do you think that it changes people? Is it ever going to, the actual weather events that become more frequent, more serious and impactful, does it change public opinion on say how we think about using fossil fuels and climate, etc.?
We'll see. I don't know if we have time to wait and see.
Right.
But I think, what was the stat I saw recently about was it 1 in 2 Americans or some large portion of Americans were whether it's fires or floods or unusual storms, were in the path of what I think we have to stop calling natural disasters, by the way, because they're not natural. They're Anthropocene disasters.
Wow.
They're made by us, right? And when self-interest but Pete, I'd say when self-interest kicks in, sense kicks in, but not true around the vaccine, not true around masks.
Yeah.
So I think this will become another area for fighting and nonsensical debate. And 2 sides where there shouldn't be 2 sides. Let me say this, I'm very, very privileged. We just lost carpeting and flooring in the basement. That's it. The insurance company came out. We're very, very, very lucky. And the losses some people had is just ungodly.
In your area. In your area.
In our area, like crazy. Which also goes to, I think that the media is Bash Media Day. Media coverage of storms has to get updated, right? Al Roker standing there being buffeted by the winds, right? Misses where the damage occurs. This occurred some years ago. I'm forgetting the name of the hurricane, that there was huge storm pouring. Oh my God, it was going to cause all this damage, and it didn't. But then it flooded the hell out of the Catskills. Like towns were wiped out. This storm didn't really cause, thank God, that much damage down in New Orleans. But what did it do in flooding up around in Bound Brook, New Jersey, near me, where people can't afford to rebuild for the third or fourth time, and where they couldn't close the floodgates because the train was stuck, and so it's no fault of theirs. Those are the people who don't need convincing. It's the people with power who need convincing.
Yeah, that's for damn sure. And you make a good point about people are not going to get vaccinated as they watch. I mean, so many of these reports of these anti-vaxxers, on the radio and YouTube, whatever, dying of COVID. Some of them, at the end recanting, but many of them not. And it's like you compare that to the threat of climate change, which is far more gradual and less visceral. Yeah, like you're watching people die on a ventilator and you're still not getting vaccinated, or even worse, you're taking a different drug that's not been approved. So what hope does that give us that people will, unless like market, the market makes these electric cars and everything else so much more affordable and convenient. I just can't see arguments winning out.
I remember, this is going to be really obnoxious what I'm about to say. I remember many years ago going to Davos. There's the obnoxious part. And I sat in a room with, in the audience with Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Al Gore. And Al Gore, who amazes me the few times I've seen him in person, is a really angry guy.
Yeah.
Really red-faced, angry guy. But he's angry for good cause, good purposes. And so, they were showing what was going to happen to the world when renewable energy got cheaper than coal.
Right.
Well, we're there.
Yeah.
Right. We're there. A friend of mine, Bill Gross at Idea Lab, is working on things to store that energy, which is part of the problem. It doesn't come at convenient moments. There's a lot of technology going on around that. We're there. We can have an impact. We have no time to waste, but we're going to have to invest tax dollars in it. We're going to have to invest investment money in it. Is that going to happen? I don't know.
I love talking to you about anything and everything, and I really appreciate you joining me today on short notice. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it. And good luck with
always a pleasure.
I want to come and audit a class. You mentioned
please do. Well, not just that. I was going to call you. I managed to get in a course in comedy and journalism.
Oh, great. Oh, interesting.
So I'm not teaching it because I'm not funny, but I'd love to have you come and talk to students.
It's just the reason I bring it up here at the end is because, when you're an older white person like you and I are compared to college students, and whether or not it's younger white people like my daughters or younger brown and black folks, like it's one thing if you had, as I did, lived around a lot of diversity in college and then post-college, but now not nearly as much, even though I live in the burbs and there is a lot of diversity. It's just different. I barely leave anyway, and I love, bringing out a diverse type of people to talk to here on the show. But when you're in college, in that atmosphere, and you're around young people and people with different backgrounds, you're constantly watering your own enlightenment by their thoughts, opinions as things change. And so, like, the things that I think I'm more educated and enlightened about because of my experience as a younger man change with the next generation of, I was talking to a bunch of my black friends from college who were saying that black people, when they were younger, probably, at least their friends, were not nearly as active. They were just not activists. They were not political. It kind of skipped that generation during the 90s. And I'm not speaking for anybody but them. But it was interesting to just talk with them about their kids now and how much of a difference it makes. And that's why I'm saying being exposed to those young folks, we all should be, if we can.
Absolutely. So Sally Cohn is teaching the course, by the way.
Oh,
so
great.
Sally.
Great. Yeah. That's awesome. So, that's great. Yeah. She's great. And that'll be great. And I'm happy to just watch and be around and listen. So awesome. Thank you very much, sir.
Good to see you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
All right, there he goes, the great Jeff Jarvis on Twitter at Jeff Jarvis, buzzmachine.com, and the new school. I'm so excited to visit him and his class. That'll be very cool. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jared Yates Sexton. And thank you for listening, hopefully supporting with a paid subscription. Go sign up now if you haven't. Really excited every time I see a new subscription come in, and if I haven't touched base with you or connected with you, let's make an appointment to do just that. I love learning more about you and potentially interviewing you for the show. And if you think you'd be a great guest, let me know. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Check out the new website, standupwithpete.com. Thank you to DJ Monzak for making that. If you are looking for a web designer, let me know. I'll give you his contacts. As always, thanks to Pete Coe for the jingles, Dan McDonald for writing today's, and finally, John Carroll for our theme song, which we play at the beginning and the end every time. You can go buy this and support John Carroll as well. He's also on Twitter at JDCarroll88. Ladies and gentlemen, Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter John Carroll, taking us out.
Stand up, show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on.